Hey everyone, welcome to our small footprint. My name is Nyssa, and if you're new here, we are a family of 8 who live off-grid in Australia. Today's video is a what we eat in a week. So I haven't done this in a while, and it normally covers more than about 7 days. It normally covers approximately 2 meals a day, like 14 meals-ish. I don't do them very often because if I'm doing my daily food prep and stuff, then most of the meals that I'm making are included in those daily videos anyway. But there is certain parts of the month where I'm not filming full days of food prep and stuff, but only the meals. So what I try and do is I point the camera at the counter whenever I make a meal, and then I just collate them later. It's a fair bit of work to hold all the footage and to get it right, and then I'll do this voiceover and then I'll put it all together, and it's like 2.5 hours of footage that then has to be condensed into a 25-30 minute video. So they're a little bit labor intensive, so I don't do them as often as I make my standard daily stuff, but everyone really enjoys them. I think it hits a bit of a different crowd, the people who just want to see the flick throughs rather than the actual full-on prep of them, just to get the ideas. And I always think of the what we eat in a week videos, because I watch other people's all the time, as a bit like flicking through a recipe magazine, like the free Coles magazines and stuff, or the those recipe magazines where you're flicking through and just glancing at all the photos and seeing all the different things. Minimal information. You can look at the recipes if you want, but minimal information, and just to get the inspiration of things that maybe you could cook with what you've got. So that's how I look at these what we eat in a week videos. I probably go into depth a little with some of the recipes and not with others. It just happens to be what I made, what footage I've got, and things like that. So I do all my notes up, and then I'll come out here and do them like normal. And then I'm in the hothouse, like in the shade cloth part of the hothouse, so there's a lot less flies than anywhere else, but it is a little bit warm and glary in here, so you'll have to excuse that. So this is a what we eat in a week for end of September, beginning of October. We're about 4 weeks into our 6-week grocery haul, and we've pretty much run out of fresh vegetables other than carrots and cabbage. So we've got frozen vegetables, which we do use. And I always find that when I do one of these what we eat in a week, I get to the end of it and I sit there and I go, man, there was a lot of bread in that, or man, there was a lot of pasta in that, or whatever else. But I'm not picking and choosing. This is just like a 7 or 8 day period of time, and this is what we ate in that period. And what happens during the day reflects on what I cook for meals too. Like, if it's a busy garden season, then I'm out in the garden till late afternoon, and then by the time I get in to make food, I want something nice and quick. Also, depending on what meat I'm cooking, we have run-on meals from that meat that I cook, which sometimes restricts what I can do for the next meal because I want to use the meat that I've already prepped. So, in saying that, as I said, we're a family of 8. The kids are, I always get it wrong, but 7, 9, 9, 10, 12 and 16, and have fairly big appetites because we lead a pretty active lifestyle. They are allowed to snack throughout the day. I don't record any snacks. I don't record breakfast, generally speaking, because the kids have breakfast first thing in the morning and it's a bit of a serve yourself affair. There is cereal available. There is a variety of milks, whether I make fresh almond milk or they have rice milk, yogurt. I make sourdough granola that they have access to. They can make porridge, or I make porridge for them. There is always eggs. There's always leftover bits of bread that they can have with it, or meats, or whatever leftovers they want from dinner the night before, and they serve themselves breakfast. And then Darryl and I only really have coffee for breakfast. So around about late morning to lunchtime, we cook up a proper cooked meal, generally speaking, which is our breakfast and everyone's lunch, and they partake in that as well. So I mostly only record that lunch meal and the dinner meal because they're the ones that I'm hands-on preparing. But of course the children eat plenty of other things around it, and I don't always show what I've baked or anything like that. Just a disclaimer, because I get questioned about it. So, so here we go. This is around about, I think it's over 9 days, this particular one, of meals, mostly lunches and dinners. So we start off on day 1. For lunch today, we had lard tortillas. So I use sourdough starter in my tortillas, but I don't always long ferment them. Sometimes it's just about using the starter so that we're rotating through the starter, because starter sitting stagnant becomes less effective. So you want to use it and refeed it and things like that. So I use sourdough starter in it, but these aren't long fermented, just a couple of hours from start to finish sort of thing. Basically using it for the texture. I use lard that I've rendered in them because we really really enjoy the texture of lard in them, as well as that sourdough starter. And these are a bit of a favourite, but they're fairly time consuming, so I don't make them as often as I probably could, though they do last quite well if you stick them in a sealed container in the fridge and use them over a couple of days. They're never quite as good as the first day, but they do work. The recipe that I use makes around about 30 of them. I dip them in flour before rolling them out nice and thin, so they've been covered in a bit of extra lard while they sit there to do their rest time, and then I dip them in a bit of flour before I roll them out. I'm not pedantic about the shape or the size of them. We use them no matter what. I don't really have the capacity to spend the time to get these circular, though I am perfectly capable of it. It just takes a little bit more thought and process that I want to use. I was aiming for roundish for this batch because I'm going to roll them up into mini burritos, so having them in a roundish sort of a shape is beneficial for that rolling motion. I heated up some seasoned ground pork, so this is pork that I have minced, I don't know, in the last day or so, and it was seasoned and it's left over in the fridge, so I heated that up. I put a jar of black beans in there that I had canned and a tin of corn. We've really enjoyed having these black beans on the shelf. This is the first time that I had canned them, and we've been using them quite heavily. I've very much enjoyed having them on the shelf. So for meals like this, it's going to stretch that meat out, but also add a different protein, different flavor profile and things like that. I soft scrambled a couple of dozen eggs and then put the pork, bean and corn mix along with the scrambled eggs into the tortillas and rolled them into little mini burrito style shapes. I cut them in half and I put them in on a platter to serve for the kids, so they were allowed to add any sort of sauce if they wanted to. There was salsa available, anything like that, and I just cut them in half and put them out, and the kids could serve themselves as much as they wanted of those. For dinner that night, I pulled some of the buttermilk chicken that I had made in one of my videos out of the freezer. So I had marinated this for 24 hours, dredged it and then fried it, and then I had flash frozen it on trays in the freezer so that I could use it again. So what I did is I just pulled it straight out of the freezer, put it onto a rack over a tray because that allows any sort of excess fat to be dripping off, stuck it in the hooded barbecue, which is our oven, and it cooks up so wonderfully from frozen. It's still tender and tasty and moist, and it's really, really good. I very much enjoy having this in the freezer. As I've said in previous videos, that it's a bit like having those frozen chicken tenders that you can buy by the kilo bagfuls in supermarkets and stuff that I don't tend to buy. So I definitely feel it was worth the effort to cook these 4.5 kilos odd that I did. It takes up a lot of freezer room though, so that is something that I'm going to have to assess. I really would like to upgrade my chest freezer to the hybrid fridge freezer that I have. One of those in a freezer setting. The massive amount of space that would give me would be just amazing for having more scope of food through each period of time. We manage through the 6 weeks, but we don't manage much more than that because we just don't have the ability to store much more than that. Even things like blanching broccoli and cauliflower and stuff, where if we get it nice and cheap, I don't tend to do because we don't have the space. So having that extra freezer space I think would make a massive difference to my ability to have more diversification of meals towards the end of our shopping period. But anyway, I served it with mashed potato, steamed veg and some gravy. Really super simple, a little bit like having KFC tenders, I suppose, with mashed potato and the steamed veg, and they were just frozen veggies that we steamed on the stove. On a day 2, I shredded up some cabbage. I mixed up some fresh duck egg mayo, which is my standard. It's 3 egg yolks with some Dijon mustard or a whole grain mustard if I've made one myself, some cowboy candy and a bit of lemon juice or vinegar, either or, mixed with the low flavour, the regular olive oil that you can get that I get from Costco, which I really need to try and grab a couple of this month if they've got it, because this is the last bottle that I've got at the moment because they haven't had any for a while. And we did try the Aldi mayo and I don't mind it, but it's not great in the Aldi olive oil, sorry, not Aldi mayo. And it's been great to have those bottles to use in all the other things, and then I can save the Costco one purely for using for mayo, but I didn't particularly like it in mayo, but we would deal with it if we had to. I water float tested a bunch of eggs because we have so much excess and the kids are the ones who bring them in. They're not really great at rotating. So I water water float tested a bunch of them, and put all the ones that are now they're still touching the bottom of the bowl, but they have a bit of a tilt to them rather than being horizontal, because that means that they're a little bit older and the air pocket is a little larger, which means that they're easier to peel when you boil them. So I put them all into a pot to boil. I bring the pot up to a boil and then start a timer for 4 minutes. This makes them boiled so the yolks are still creamy, but they're not runny, because some of the kids don't like runny yolks. So that's how I do my boiled eggs. I mixed up a bunch of simple yeasted flatbreads and cooked them off in the cast iron. This is a very standard yeasted flatbread recipe that I use all the time. I heated up a jar of the pork that I can. I get asked a bit to show how we use the meat that I've canned, so I made sure to show this. So this is just a jar of pork. It was just pork chunks in a jar, nothing else, and canned. This is how we do most of our canned pork. I would like to try some seasoning on it at some point, because I just think it'd be kind of nice, but plain is fine. All we do is we drain it, and then I pour it into a hot cast iron pan, break it up a little bit, and heat it through. Sometimes we'll add a barbecue sauce or something, but mostly we just have it as is, and it's just basically pulled pork. It is from the shoulder, so it is a little bit lean, so it can be a little bit dry, but not to a point that it's inedible, just that it is, you just know that that's not the optimal cut for pulled pork. I mixed mayo through the cabbage, peeled the eggs, served up the pork and coleslaw on the flatbreads with boiled eggs on the side, platter style, for the kids to help themselves. I just did a whole lot of them and put them all out on a platter for the kids to eat. For dinner that night, I wanted to use up more of the cabbage. Once I've cut a cabbage open, I like to try and use it over the next few meals, because it's never as crispy the longer it sits in a fridge or anything. Even if you cover it with one of the leaves of the cabbage and things like that, it's still never as fresh once it's sat there for very long. So it's always nice to use it as quickly as possible just to get it at optimal freshness. So I made a basic ramen. I sliced up the cabbage, sauteed it with some of the chicken thighs that we had, the marinated chicken thighs, mixed some egg yolks, mayo, and the vegeta together in a bowl, and cooked off the ramen noodles. These are the Jinmai Ling noodles. I mentioned them a bit because I'm really happy with them. They're only $3.10 per kilo pack of dried noodles. They cook up really lovely and soft. They only take about 4 minutes in boiling water. So I add them and some of the noodle water into the egg mix. It cooks the eggs with the heat of the noodles and the water, and you end up with a lovely creamy sauce. You definitely need to add more of the noodle water through to thin it out, depending on what you're serving it with. And then I mixed all the cabbage and chicken through and served it up. We add a myriad of things to this dish. Whatever veg we have available is to use. It's very versatile, very tasty, and I do different flavored ramens with this too. Like sometimes I don't just use the whole vegeta mayo thing. Sometimes we have a green curry base and all that sort of thing. It just really depends on how quickly I want to get the meal out and what I've got available. This is our really simple version that's really quick to make up, and I don't have to boil a broth or anything like that. So sometimes it's fancier, sometimes it's simpler, and the kids enjoy it either way. Day 3, we had no more pork on the shelf. This is something that I now have noted down, because I may have to do something about that next shopping trip, because we do tend to eat a lot of flatbreads with meat and salad in summer, especially if we get a garden going. So I might need to buy a case of the pork and can one up to go on the shelf. Each jar holds around about like 500 grams of pork, maybe just slightly more. So for like a whole roast, they're normally around about the 7 kilo mark, and so I can sometimes get 10 to 14 jars out of one of those roasts, and I think that's a good buy, because they're $6.99 a kilo, so they're like $50 for a roast, and that's going to put, say, 10 jars of pork on the shelf. That's 10 different meals that we use that pork. Obviously it's still a minimal amount of meat when we're using it, so sometimes we'll need to bump it up with the beans or whatever else, or open 2 jars, but I still think that's a pretty neat way to do it. So I grabbed a jar of beef instead. I tend to use this beef mostly for pies and things. It's no different than the pork, really. It's just a shredded beef, but it's a lot softer. So when you pour it out, you have to be gentle with it. I generally like to leave some of the juice from the jar in there as well, whereas I drain most of the pork juices because I find it has a better texture that way. There was leftover sourdough tortillas from the day before yesterday. I didn't realize that there had been some. So they were in the fridge. I pulled them out. So I made some like quesadilla type things. The sourdough tortillas aren't going to be anywhere near as nice 2 days from when they were made, but perfectly good for a quesadilla. So I drained some black beans, then added them to the beef. This was actually the last jar of black beans, and I didn't realize until I went to use some the other day. So I definitely need to do that too, but I have to soak them for 12 hours before I can them, and so it has to be a something I remember to do. But I definitely will do that again. I only did 1 can a load last time because I just wasn't sure how we'd eat them, but we've gone through them fairly quickly, so I'll probably do a whole bunch up next for us. So I put some mayo and fresh tomato slices on the quesadillas, and then the beef and black bean mix. Super simple. Served them with some leftover coleslaw, a bit of salsa, and some sour cream. For some reason I don't have dinner film that night. I'm not entirely sure what we had. I'm guessing I decided I didn't want to cook and someone else did. Or we had enough of various leftovers to pull together a meal with, and the kids were told to, figure out what they wanted to eat, and we just reheated stuff. I have no idea. I'm guessing I probably made Darryl cook because there's no footage. Normally there would be footage if I made anything at all. Day 4, we started the morning off with a Dutch baby pancake. So using up eggs is still a high priority at the moment, and Dutch babies are a great way to do it. This is one recipe I have managed to get up on the website. I heat a pan in the oven with a generous knob of butter or ghee or oil, whatever you want to use. And then while that's heating up, I mix in my Thermomix 18 eggs, 600 grams of milk. We use a 400 gram tin of coconut cream plus water to top it up, and 350 grams of flour. I blitz it on high until it's blended and fluffy, scrape it down and then blend it again. All that air incorporated is a good thing. So using a food processor or a whisk or something is a good idea. Using it by hand, a whisk is fine. You're just going to take a little bit of elbow grease. And being that my hands and shoulders and my whole me doesn't like doing that sort of a movement, the Thermomix works really well for me for that. You pour it into the hot pan directly in the oven or the barbecue, directly into that fat, and then the fat will move around the pan as you're pouring it in, and let it cook. Today we went super simple. Sometimes we do toppings for them, sometimes we do a compote, sometimes we do stewed fruit, sometimes we do a savoury topping, but today it was super simple. I had heaps of eggs, so I cooked 2 trays full so everyone could have their fill. And we just served it with the strawberry syrup that I had made from the tops of all the strawberries I had processed. So this was just all the tops of the strawberries steam juiced and then sugar added and canned as a syrup. I had wanted to try making my own spring roll wrappers. I have bought them before, but I don't buy them often. And with the new sweet chili sauce I put on the shelf, I really wanted something to dip them in to try. I watched a lot of videos. I got inspiration from Living the Dream Permaculture on Instagram the other day. But I really just could not get it to work. I couldn't get the thickness right to make them easy to peel up. They were either too thick or too thin. I tried brushing it on. I tried pouring and swirling. I don't know. Maybe it's because I use a cast iron pan, but I don't own a non-stick pan. I have considered buying a cast iron crepe pan for crepes, but maybe it would work for this as well. I don't know. And anyone who's made them, let me know. But it didn't go well enough for me to continue to pursue that line of dinner. So I gave up on that and we just had bolognese. I freeze our bolognese in bulk, so it's always a great fallback meal. It's full of vegetables. It's super tasty. It's served with spaghetti pasta or spirals or whatever choice. Sometimes it's made into a bake. Sometimes it's just served as is. And it's a favourite of the kids. We have used some lentils in this batch. And then all the normal, it's got carrot and mushroom and zucchini and onion and garlic and all the tomato paste. I make them in bulk, and then I freeze it in 1.2 kilo bags so that it is available just to pull out and eat when we want it. On day 5, I had made up a quadruple batch of bagel dough the night before to proof overnight on the counter. A double batch of dough will generally only give us 1 day worth of bagels, maybe a couple left, but generally speaking I make a double batch and we eat it all in sort of a 24-hour period. So by doing a quadruple batch I was hoping to have the next day's bread as well. It doesn't always work that way, but if I cook more sometimes we just eat more, but we'll see how we go. I did all the normal. I divided them into approximately 90-gram balls. I shaped them with the holes in the middle and let them rise for another 15 minutes. Then I boiled them in water with a bit of honey in it. I boiled them for about 45 seconds each side. and then remove them from the water. Once they are handleable again, I dip them in a mix of spices. I use garlic granules, onion granules, flaked sea salt, some sesame seeds and poppy seeds, and then I get them ready for the oven. Super simple. It is a little bit time consuming, but the giant new pot that someone sent me that I have been lusting after for a while, and someone sent me but sent it anonymously, makes this a whole lot quicker because I can boil like a dozen bagels at a time. Whereas the smaller pot, I was only able to boil 6 or 7 at a time. This has definitely reduced the time it takes me to make these big batches. We served them with some mayo, caramelized onion jam. Darryl had some of the pepper jelly, which he really likes, by the way, and some eggs with any excess seed mix sprinkled over the top. We couldn't get bacon cheap this month, so we haven't had bacon all month, we'd normally have bacon on these. But I have got some pork belly brining, so we'll have bacon for later on in the month, which will just make it all that much nicer. For dinner that night, I was making pie. I had chicken and veg pie mix in the freezer that I'd pulled out the day before and put in the fridge for dinner tonight. So I made up some pastry to make the pie. I do my standard pastry mix. It's a blend of olive oil and lard in it. I find it really easy to work with and fairly fail-proof. I struggled a lot for a long time to make pastry that was short, pleasantly short, but not so short that it was inedible. I had a lot of issues with it, so I'm really glad that I've finally gotten to a point where I am happy with the pastry that I make. I use the Thermomix, food processor Thermomix type thing, or you can use a handheld pastry cutter too, of course, until it's all in crumbles, and then tip it out on the dough mat and bring it together without working it excessively. You don't want to melt all of that fat in there, so you want some little globules of fat to go to chill, so that will create more air in your pastry. Put it into disc shapes, 1 disc for the bottom, 1 for the top, and then stuck it in the fridge for a few hours. I go super simple and rustic with my pies. I use my enamel-lined cast iron dishes. I line the base with the pastry, pour in the filling, and put pastry on top, tucking it all in and making a general wave around the top, just pinching it together. Cutting a slice in the top to let out steam. I really should egg wash it or something for looks, but we love anything in pastry. I could just use short crust on the bottom and puff on the top too, but we do enjoy the short crust top and bottom, so that's what I do most of the time. I would normally only bake 1 pie and serve with mash and other veggies for dinner or something, but I was lazy today. And because the pie filling is full of vegetables as well, there was spinach and carrot and potato and onion and garlic and all sorts of things in it. I just cooked 2 pies and we had these for dinner. Not, as I said, normally I would have 1 pie and would have sides. This particular day, I just cooked 2 pies up and we just had that for dinner. And ate every scrap of it. There was no leftovers. Day 6. So this day there's no lunch shown. I swear I try and film each meal when I know I want to do a what we eat in a week. I'm guessing there was potentially leftover bagels, maybe leftover bolognese. There wasn't any extra pie, but again, there must have just been enough bits and pieces of meals for everyone to eat. I'm assuming it was bagels because I did that whole double batch of bagels with the hopes that it would be 2 different meals. So I'm guessing Darryl probably did them, toasted them up, fried off some eggs and things like that, and we just had the bagels again for lunch. For dinner, we had marinated chicken with lemon chung sauce. So I had planned this the day before, so I'd pulled out some raw chicken thighs that I had put with soy sauce, garlic and ginger and vacuum sealed in the freezer into the fridge to defrost for dinner tonight. I decided to make up some fried rice with it because it uses up eggs and it gives us leftover fried rice as well. So I scrambled a whole bunch of eggs. I made the rice early in the day so that by the time I'm making it into fried rice, it has cooled and separated a little bit. Added corn. I probably should have added some steamed veg or something as well for this dish, but I think I'm just so rushed by dinner time at the moment that I'm pushing through and not really thinking about it at the time. There was corn and eggs and stuff in the rice, but anyway. I added sesame oil, soy and oyster sauce. I didn't realize I'd run out of ketchup minis when I went to make the fried rice, but I didn't have any, so I didn't add it. So I just added a bit of oyster sauce, sesame oil, soy, and then just served a scoop of rice with the chicken on top. The chicken had been dredged in seasoned potato starch and then fried up in batches to use. Lots of frying has happened this month too, it seems. Some kids like the lemon chunk sauce and some don't, so we drizzled the relevant ones. These were the bowls I got cheap from Kmart last shopping trip. They're quite a good size. I like to serve small the first serving, and they can always come back for more if they want, rather than have wastage left in the bowls. So that way too, there's, you didn't finish your dinner. Well, if it's a small serve and they didn't finish it, then that is relevant. Whereas if you've loaded them with a decent serve and they haven't finished it, well, maybe they just weren't as hungry, sort of thing. So served them all up, and then they could come back for more later. Day 7. I had discovered the night before that we'd run out of ketchup mayonnaise when I was making the fried rice, which is unusual for me to not have a spare. Like, that's why I keep a running inventory. But maybe I purposely didn't buy it to force myself to try and make it, because I had been researching recipes to make it. It turns out ketchup mayonnaise is basically just soy sauce and brown sugar cooked down until thick. Super simple. There is some recipes that have some other spices in it, some that had like some clove or some ginger or things like that, but the basic premise was soy sauce, sugar, cooked down till it's thick and syrupy, which makes sense because we've always just referred to it as a sweet soy sauce. So that's what I did. Soy sauce and sugar with a bit of molasses into the pot and simmered until the sugar was dissolved and it was sticky. Then I made up some okonomiyaki to have with it, shredded up some cabbage, added egg, flour, water and soy sauce, and got it to the consistency I wanted. I do have a whole video on making okonomiyaki and judging the texture and stuff that you want based on how you prefer to eat it. I really should get this up on the website as well to go along with that video. There is just so much gardening happening at the moment that I'm not getting much done of an evening. I'm crashing really early. I cooked the okonomiyaki up in the pan. I like to cook it in smaller portions so I get them out quicker and they cook quicker, but you can do full round pan-sized ones if that's your preference as well. Once the ketchup mayonnaise was where I thought it should be, knowing that it will thicken up further when chilled, or well, the store-bought stuff does, so I assume this will as well, I poured it into a couple of the small sauce jars I have, and then we served up the okonomiyaki. Some chicken thighs sprinkled over the top. We don't use much, it's just a small bag out of the freezer between the 8 of us. It's just to add that texture to mostly to the dish. Homemade ketchup mayonnaise and some mayo. Super delicious meal, this one. It's one of our faves, and Darryl actually favoured you all with another one of his hand sweep gestures after we had discussed his last sort of sweeping flourishes. I put a pork roast in the smoker early on in that day for dinner that night. This is about 1/2 of the roll of a rolled pork roast, so about a 3 kilo roast. I slathered it in some Dijon mustard to help the rub to stick to it, and it helps with moisture retention. The rub is a mix of smoked paprika, brown sugar, garlic, onion, pepper, salt. It's a pretty standard mix that I use for a lot of things, changing the flavours up a bit depending on what I'm cooking. So this is a pretty standard one that I use with mustard on pork roast. I do add mustard powder to this rub sometimes on things that aren't going to be slathered in mustard before getting the rub on it, so it really depends on what I'm making, but this is the basic flavours that I use. I coat it well and then stick a probe into the thickest part of the roast to go into the smoker. I will cook this until it hits about 63 degrees Celsius or 145 Fahrenheit, which is a medium rare, which is how we like to cook these pork roasts. They're sort of melt in your mouth if they're done to that point. If you cook them any further, then they're quite chewy and tough, which is fine, but we really like that soft texture that almost melts in your mouth. To have with the pork, because I was being lazy, and I'm obviously relying on bread a bit this week, I see now when I look back, I just made some flatbreads. We had cabbage left from the okonomiyaki, so I shredded that up to make coleslaw with, cooking them off in the cast iron like normal. Then after the roast had hit temp and had time to rest, I sliced it up. I like to slice it nice and thin. It not only goes further, but it's softer in the mouth as well. And we just had bits of the pork with a generous amount of the cabbage mixed with the homemade duck egg mayo as well. Very basic sort of a dinner meal, that one. On day 8, so this is partly why I continue through an extra couple of days, is to show you how we use some of these meat products and things like that we cook along various meals. So when we smoke one of those pork roasts, we try and use it for a few meals. If we're having slabs of it with mash and veg and gravy, it doesn't always go very far, but if we want to stretch it over a few meals with other things like on the wraps, then it can go further. It just depends on what I'm after. It's been warm and I've been really busy, so things like the wraps appeal, but I always feel guilty that there aren't more varied veg. Hopefully the way the garden is looking, we will get plenty to use fresh from the garden this year. The kids also snack all day. They have dried fruit, canned fruit, smoothies. They have free access to pickles, carrots, and any other fruit and veg that's available. We also made up some prune and date energy balls the other day, which they've been eating, and I need to make up a bunch of the smoothie pops too, which I put all sorts of things in for them as well, hemp seeds and some avocado and things like that. And it just makes me feel like I'm doing better when they have that variety of things as well. So for lunch that day, we had leftover fried rice heated up with a bit of ghee, and then some of the sliced pork added, and served it with some soft fried eggs over the top, as well as a drizzle of that homemade ketchup minis, which was really, really nice, well worth making, and super simple, realistically. So we will do that again, and it'll be one less thing that I have on my shopping list. On day 9, I had a pork belly that was desperately calling me for me to do something with, so I decided that I would try out the pork belly bites that I'd seen pop up a lot. I did them in the smoker, so I took an offcut of the belly that would fit into a gallon Ziploc for turning into bacon, and then diced up the rest into largish chunks. I coated the pork with a bit of mustard, similar to the smoked roast, to help the rub stick and to help with moisture, though the belly is a much fattier cut, so moisture really shouldn't be too much of an issue. I coated it with the leftover rub from the roast, just the brown sugar, paprika, garlic, salt, pepper, onion mix. I pulled it all onto a rack to go into the smoker. This rack has smaller squares, so it's better than the racks that come with the smoker because they only have vertical bars and they have much larger gaps. This one is sort of a gridded one, so it's good for anything small that's going in there. I filled 2 trays with the pork to go in the smoker, nice and spread out. I put a probe into one of the largest pieces to monitor it. So we want to get it to about 75 Celsius or 165 Fahrenheit as the first step. Once it hits that temperature, I pull it out and transfer it into a tray. I'm limited on tray options for the smoker because it's an odd shape, but this square cast iron tray fits just, like it touches the sides, but it fits. So I transferred it all into there and put a bit of ghee over the top. A lot of the recipes had butter and honey and quite large quantities. I didn't feel that that was necessary, but I just drizzled a little bit of ghee, and it was just the very end of a jar that we had there. I didn't really think it needed honey, and I was a bit concerned about honey burning too. But anyway. Then I covered it with foil and then put the probe into one of the biggest chunks that I could find in there and put it back in the smoker. Leaving it in the smoker until the internal temp is about 95 Celsius or 200 Fahrenheit. I had made some slider rolls up. The dough had proofed, and then I shaped it into smaller rolls, about 80 grams each. This is just a discard recipe because I wanted it same day, so I added a little bit of instant yeast to it as well as my sourdough starter rather than overnight proof. As I said before, sometimes if I've been slack with doing overnight proofs and I have starter sitting in the fridge, I just want to use it so that it's churning through, so adding it to things like this doesn't hurt, and it can give it better texture, especially if it's going all day, but it's not enough to give it a full proof. Once the buns had proofed in the pan, I brushed some egg over the top and sprinkled on some sesame seeds. Now, my pastry brush has gone missing, and I could only find the top of the silicone pastry brush, so it wasn't pretty, but it worked. And then I put them into the oven. Once the belly was at temperature, I pulled it out, I transferred it to another tray to leave some of the excess fat behind, and then shredded it with a couple of forks. Most of it just fell apart. It was perfectly cooked. I did stir a bit of our plum barbecue sauce into it as well, just to add that extra barbecue smoky flavour. I was going to do some baked chips or something with these, and I got sidetracked in the garden and ran out of time, so we just served them up as is. A salad would have been nice with these. Again, I'm dreaming of having a successful garden this summer and have the ability to just go out and grab those, or like grilled zucchini would have been nice with this or something, but anyway, we will get there. So we just had the coleslaw, the pulled pork, and added sauce if desired on these for dinner. The kids could add sauce if they wanted, either more plum barbecue, smoky barbecue, apple butter barbecue, ketchup if that's what they really wanted, and if there was any ketchup left, mayo, anything that they wanted to add they could, but the coleslaw had plenty of mayo on it, and there was the plum barbecue in the pork as well, so for me it had plenty. So that was 9 days of meals. As I said, in about the 4 weeks into the 6-week grocery trip. We are a little low on a few things because this trip had only planned to be a 4-week grocery trip, and it ends up being a 6-week one instead, a bit due to logistical issues. So we are a little stretched for some of the food than we normally would. There's plenty of food. But we are a little stretched in choices because I had intended there to be only 4 weeks between shops, which means I would have been going shopping. I would have come back this week. going shopping. I don't know. I can't. I've lost track. But it is going to be a bit longer than I had planned out the shopping for, which is fine. It saved us some money because I shopped for 4 weeks, so I spent a little bit less, and I'll make it stretch for the 6 weeks. But it also means that it could cost me a little bit more for the next trip because I have to make up the stuff that I ended up having to run out of. So, you know, pros and cons there. So anyway, yes, 9 days of meals. I hope you enjoyed watching. I hope there's some, you know, useful inspiration there for some people, and I will see you on the next video. Thanks, guys.